digitaljamsessions.com. Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we're joined by Steve from Social Chain and Mark from Cultcha. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hello.
Hiya.
So if I could ask you very briefly to just explain a little bit more about who you are and where you're from. Let's start with Steve. Tell us about Social Chain.
So Social Chain, I'm Steve. I'm the CEO of Social Chain, and Social Chain is Europe's largest influencer marketing agency. We're tasked with getting hundreds of thousands and millions of people to talk about products on social media. We really specialize in Twitter specifically, and our business is 9 months old and it employs 50 young people. The average age is 22, and we own hundreds and hundreds of the largest social media pages in the UK.
Awesome. And Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Cultcha?
Absolutely. So Cultcha is a user-generated music review site where anyone can get involved. We provide free passes to festivals, gigs, and pre-release albums for basically fans to give their opinions.
Awesome. So, gentlemen, I wanted to talk today a little bit about social audiences, because I feel like these two businesses that you're engaged with, you are in a very good position to discuss and talk about this. But I think what we're getting to now is this next generation, if you like, of social audiences and community and collaboration that is perhaps somewhat different to what people are used to. And the faster we move towards this, the more uncomfortable certain people get with it. But I think from your perspective, Mark, what you're doing with Cultcha is quite interesting in that it is very much, I'm going to use this description, correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of like TripIt, but for music gigs. Is that about right?
Yeah, I mean, we would use the TripAdvisor sort of methodology coupled with sort of hooks of BuzzFeed. But yeah, TripIt would be pretty much on the money as well.
Yeah.
We saw a massive change in the way that sort of our core audience of 18 to 13-year-olds were accessing music media. So whether it be reviews on the latest albums or going about buying tickets. And I think companies in the sort of ticket vending sort of area, like Songkick and CrowdSearch, have taken advantage of this change as well. But from a content perspective, we saw massive declines with this core audience engaging with the likes of traditional media brands, which are synonymous with this market. Yeah. So we decided that because we were young enough and sort of flexible enough to change the way that our business operated, we could, instead of using what would be a traditional editorial team to provide reviews on the newest music, we would use the audience, the guys who are buying this music and the guys who are essentially the ones influencing where this goes.
Okay. So from your perspective then, Steve, with Social Chain, what you're fundamentally talking about here is using existing social media profiles to influence other profiles. Is that what we're talking about here? Influencer marketing, is that where we're at?
Yeah, that's correct. That's a mixture of huge social accounts that we've created ourselves, and then celebrities and people who are non-celebrity sort of famous people and such. Yeah.
So I'm curious because you're kind of playing in this playground that's very misunderstood often by certainly the traditional kind of studio industries. And when I say studio, I'm talking film industry, game industry, and music industries. So have you had any major clients who have been film clients at this point? And if so, do you feel that there is a willingness to shift the way that they approach the building of communities and the outreach they're making towards this younger generation?
So in terms of the movie studios, we work with all the movie studios. We work with Warner, Universal, Fox, E1. The other ones have slipped my mind, but we work with them all. We focus mainly on movie releases as opposed to building their sort of social followings or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we did a campaign last night for a movie studio, and we're working on multiple movies at any given time. In terms of the industry and the way they've sort of adopted social media, and especially what we do, because it is a very new thing, it's like dominoes. Like once one of them, I think our first client was Fox. And once Fox had done it and seen the results, it was a good enough reason for their competitors at the other studios in the industry to do the same way. But it's always about getting that first person to agree to take what is perceived at the moment at that time to be a risk before it then becomes the norm. And one day we won't be considered to be so disruptive when everyone's using our services.
Okay, so When you talk about these results for Fox, which movie are we talking? Which title are we talking about? What kind of results are we talking about that were so different from perhaps what they were expecting?
In terms of specific titles, I'm not sure if I can divulge that because I sign a lot of contracts to keep things confidential. But in terms of results, we've got over 1 million views on a trailer within 4 hours. Mm-hmm. We've got 30, 40, 50,000 people to talk about the movie every time that we spoke about it on our network. We made one of the Fox movies trend 7 times on Twitter. Mm-hmm. We do crazy things. So we've sent influencers up and down the country on tour buses, meeting fans and doing sort of challenges which relate to the movie itself, content taken from the movie. And that has been featured on Snapchat, because we created such a huge hype. Snapchat featured it on their story, the London Live story which got hundreds of thousands of views and cut into an audience, which is really hard to cut into. And yeah, incredible results, which you just ordinarily wouldn't be able to get. I mean, there's not really any way to get 50,000 people and 1 million trailer views and to trend on Twitter within the space of 3 or 4 hours.
So when we're talking about this kind of result, this kind of advertising, is it something that is transparent to the user, the end user, that they're being influenced in that way? Or is this something that is very much kind of under the bonnet, so to speak?
I think when we started out, we weren't aware of the regulations in terms of advertising. And as we've gone on, we've had to become more conscious of what the rules are. So we've had to adopt a number of things. The most notable one is that every asset that we use for advertising, it will say in the bio of the page that the posts on the page are sponsored, for example. And it's a constant challenge to try and make sure we're playing within whatever the rules are at the time, and the regulations are always changing. So yeah, we've got like a lot of legal advice on what we have to do and what we can and can't do.
So Mark, from your perspective, when you're talking about this collaborative peer-to-peer relationship that you're cultivating with more of a community sentiment, do you feel that there is a future for almost kind of like a hive mind, if you like, that Social Chain is utilising that approach, which is mobilising a singular audience at a specific moment in time, versus what you're doing, which is a little bit more community-led and a bit more conversation-led?
The short answer is very much a case of yes. I would see, the work that Steve and Social Chain does is integral to not only advertising, but, community-driven projects going forward to build brands and successful campaigns. I think it would be the evolution of where the media agency or the sort of traditional buying and planning teams have come from and where they're going with sort of what they need to do, because, the successes that Steve's been talking about for the campaigns that he's been working on are, I would probably suggest, unachievable by most traditional media agencies. That's why I'm hoping Steve's business is doing very well. So it's a very much a case of the way we're looking at things is, I think, the word that Steve used before is disruptive. We're looking to make sure that the people who are the, core customers of these films, or the viewers, the key listeners to the new albums that are coming out, and the key product buyers, many of the big advertisers that are sort of putting their brands across more traditional media, see that, as Steve said, that in 5 years' time we're not seen as disruptive, we're seen as the norm. And I think that's happened with the likes of social media in the past. Obviously, the biggest company in the world would probably suggest that, but the likes of Google, Apple, Facebook, they're all going down routes which would suggest that influencers are the way forward. For us, it's more of an organic, obviously, sort of drive, but these are the guys who are influencing where the next big success goes. And I think that it's up to them to choose who they do and don't promote or buy, basically.
Okay, so both of you have a platform that fundamentally it's talking around the content, but it's not necessarily generating or owning the content. Do you think for either of you that there will be a point at which you want to own the platform as well as the content itself, a la Netflix?
That's a great question. From a subculture's perspective, not right at this moment in time. When it comes to content from music, obviously the likes of Spotify, although it's music content, and other platforms like Reverb Nation will lead that shout. I think for us, it's all about providing a platform where communities of music fans can talk about the music they love without any sort of influence from teams of people who might be trying to push ideas on them, traditional editorial teams, but not owning it right at this moment in time, though.
What about you, Steve?
For us, it's not something that's particularly important either. We live on these networks, and we live on multiple networks at the same time. So we're reliant on Periscope, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Vine, and so on. And so it's not really an achievable or realistic expectation for us to one day own the network as well as the channels that we have now. Okay.
So I'm curious, you've mentioned quite a few different social media platforms and channels there. In your estimation at this point in time, which do you feel has the most influence, has the most direct impact at this moment in time, but which do you think is going to be shift into the lead position or perhaps take over at a future point down the line?
So for us, it's a hard one. It depends on the content. So like video is doing immensely well on Facebook right now because Facebook have adapted all their algorithms to make like articles and videos rise above everything else. So if we're doing a campaign which is sort of focused on video, we tend to look to Facebook. If we're doing and that's the most powerful platform for that type of content. If we're doing something where we're, like we did last night for Comedy Central, where we're getting a mass of people to talk about a TV show, we'll use Twitter because that's got a chronological timeline, which is obviously essential for live commentary, and you can create trends and such and things like that. And then for things where it's more visual, we'll use Instagram. In terms of networks that we think are going to take over or are the best ones to invest in per se, I think there's widespread belief amongst our team anyway that Instagram is the one which we should be investing most in right now because they're implementing a number of changes which make it ripe, not necessarily for the consumer, but for companies like ours. So things like Instagram introducing trending and there's talk of them introducing clickable links within posts and things like this make it awesome for advertisers, but maybe not so necessarily awesome for the consumer, but yeah, or the user.
I was hoping you were going to say Subcultcha there, Steve.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
So I am curious to understand from the perspective of, an indie filmmaker or an indie game maker or indie music maker for that matter, because we focus on entertainment industries here, where you think the future lies in terms of utilising something like a social chain or a subculture type platform, where the middle ground lies for the smaller independents, because that does tend to be traditionally quite a significant gap between what the big studios are using, the big distributors are using, versus what these independents can afford to really get on board with. And, that was in part the reason why things like crowdfunding really took off for games developers and game studios. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
From Subcultcha's perspective, again, this is kind of the $1 million question. Well, I say $1 million, probably a lot more than that now. For most of the big studios and the record labels, there's a massive issue that we find with supporting up-and-coming artists. In fact, we had an interview with Midge Ure, who's one of the founders of Band-Aid, who was saying that given sort of 30 years ago when U2 first started out, if they'd been in the same position now in the music industry as they were back then, they would have been given one chance at their album, and U2 only started picking up after about 5 albums. So it's a real sort of change in where things are heading. The studios have got I keep saying studios, the record labels have got a massive, massive problem to solve in the fact that do they back up-and-coming artists and really stick by them to see if they can grow and develop them into being, multi-million-pound selling artists such as the Arctic Monkeys, or do they give them one chance and hope for the best? And I think from the perspective of the music industry, indie artists are in a really, really tough spot right now because everyone's decided that giving away free content is the way forward. And unfortunately, it's not working. So from a subculture perspective, we want to give as much sort of voice to as many up-and-coming bands as we possibly can by opening up a platform to be able to review everything and anything. Although it does provide, obviously, a massive amount of breadth, it does provide people who are good with the opportunity to develop much quicker.
I find it interesting, you're talking here about the future of the music industry, and there is this fundamental perception that, and forgive me because I know you're part of the music industry, so you may not agree with me on this, but there does seem to be, generalistically, a perception that music isn't perhaps as valued as something like going to the cinema or downloading a game or buying a game. That willingness to pay maybe $9.99 for a subscription to a game versus paying $1.99 for a download of music. There does seem to be an inherent difference in the perception of value when it comes to music, and people don't seem to be as guilty or feel as much of a guilt when they decide to pirate some music, for example. So what do you think is going to be the future of the music industry on that basis?
If I knew, I think I'd be a lot further on the line and richer than I am now. I think that there's a couple of sort of responses to that. I think that the music industry, 80% of most artists' revenue come from live events now, whether it be festivals or gigs, with sort of 20% going down to album sales. And the reason that I think the album sales are so low is because the music industry is so slow to react with regards to technology. In a similar way to the way that the sort of film industry has changed, Blockbuster given the opportunity to buy Netflix however many years ago for I think it was about 2.5 million. And look at them now. I think that the music industry, the Spotifys of the world, do have vested interest from the big labels, but they're changing the way that not only artists make money, but users access new music. And that will only get bigger, in my opinion, going forward. I think it's down to the bands now to work as hard as possible, which has always been the case, to get as much exposure as possible. And then, some of the most successful bands have been some of the most hardworking, where they get most of their revenue from live touring.
Indeed, this is very true. I'm curious from your perspective, Steve, with this new generation of very young folk that you're kind of working with in terms of communication, but also within your teams, what do you think the impact of things like wearables is going to be on the way that people are utilising their social media networks? I'm really
yet to see any wearable any wearable sort of technology that has the potential to be widely adopted amongst young people. There's a number of cool things which I see like conceptualised and such, but there's a number of factors that come into play when trying to get young people or to get people in general to adopt wearable technology. And one of the biggest ones is from a sort of very vain perspective, just like how it looks. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges. But also, is there really a need to be more connected to our technology is another question. When this is one of the things that I was discussing with some friends about the Apple Watch and how unnecessary I believe the Apple Watch to be. And, with Apple's products, I think I remember when the iPad came out, I thought that was unnecessary. But with the Apple Watch, I feel like it's really, really unnecessary to have your iPhone strapped to your wrist. Do you know what I mean? No,
I'm completely in agreement. I actually have this lovely wearable called an Altruist that is a piece of jewellery that's designed to be worn as either a ring, necklace or bracelet, a normal ring, bracelet or necklace that's very fashionable looking. But the purpose is it's Bluetooth connected to my phone, and what that allows me to do is to actually filter what I'm willing to take my phone out and look at it for. So it will notify me if certain keywords are being used or certain people contact me, or at certain times of the day it'll let certain types of calls through, and it'll buzz. My piece of jewelry will buzz accordingly to let me know that I should probably look at my phone. But if it's not important enough or it's not filtered through, it won't come through. And that actually allows me to disconnect from the technology. It allows me to not have to worry about constantly pulling out my phone to look at it all the time. Every time somebody tries to ring me or call me or text me or whatever, I don't have to keep looking at my phone all of the time. So I am very much in agreement with you in terms of the psychological need that we have on our technology has become something that it's almost like a crutch for many people. I think the average is something like 7 to 9 minutes. Between 7 and 9 minutes is how long somebody can cope with not looking at their phone.
So I've watched like all the reviews on the Apple Watch, and it's basically like notifications for your phone on your wrist.
Yeah.
The big, when I'm not talking about the health or the Fitbit elements or stuff like that to your heart rate, but in general, it's like, it's notifications to your wrist. And there's something about me that really enjoys my notifications going to my phone and then me going to my phone to see my notifications as opposed to my notifications coming to my body. And so I think there's a lot of these ideas, like in concept are quite attractive, but when in actuality, it's like I don't actually want notifications to come to me personally. Like, and I had a friend who, when he first got his Apple Watch, got like 70 odd notifications come to his watch in a day, and his phone is 50 centimeters from his watch, so I don't know how hard it is to. Do you know what I mean? I think we're getting a little bit crazy with everything.
No, I think you're completely right. I mean, it is a bit of a statement about us as society when we can't cope with actually just pulling out a phone to look at it.
Yeah, it wasn't. I think it wasn't a problem to solve. Like, it wasn't a problem that. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't an invention that wasn't necessarily in my mind solving a problem. But the other problem with the wearable technology is fundamentally it's not cool. Like, the Apple Watch isn't cool. Like, if you have an Apple Watch on and you're my age, you're not cool.
It's kind of like putting Google glasses on your head.
Yeah, that's also not cool. So
there are good examples where I think the wearable technology does solve some problems. I mean, there's a good example for the festival scene right now where you can have your cash band as your wristband and your entry band, and it's one function of a band that goes around your wrist, and you don't have to worry about carrying your wallet, your credit cards, or anything else. Apart from probably your Apple phone and your watch. But it does mean that, if festival goers, suddenly find they've lost their wallet, they've still got the ability to pay for goods on the band.
Yeah, no, that's good. And also, like the Fitbit things, for running and knowing how many steps you take a day and your cholesterol, your heart rate and things like that. That's also really good uses of wearable technology. But, I think talking in terms of like a piece of technology that young people would adopt and wear every single day.
Also, the price points as well are very high. I mean, I'm not entirely sure what the price of the Apple Watch is, but if you have an iPhone to start with, you're paying a very high premium to have
It's a lifestyle choice at the end of the day. To have any Apple technology is a lifestyle choice and requires you to have a certain amount of money in the bank in the first place.
Yeah, but it's weird because most of the users that we speak to, so we normally try and speak to our reviewers base who are around about sort of students or just above. They don't have the funds to buy sort of top of the range smartphones, so they will basically have the cheapest tariffs, very much small amounts of data, and the cheapest phones. So when it comes to talking to potential advertisers, it's a very sort of re-educating people on what these products are there for.
And I also wanted to say on the wearable piece. I do have a piece of wearable technology. It's my iPhone. I wear it on my hand everywhere I go. It's in my hand right now, and it follows me to the toilet, the bathtub, the shower. When I go to sleep, it's attached to my hand. And so
it's not good to take your phone to bed with you. It's not good.
Yeah,
it's a lot safer to take the Apple Watch into the toilet than it is to hold your phone over the toilet.
True. I learned when I dropped it in the toilet. That's the advantage of it not being wearable. But the microphone's broken now because it went into the toilet basin, but it survived.
Okay. This is possibly
Fantastic everywhere.
Not quite where I saw this conversation going. But I do have a question for you, Steve. First of all, you referred several times now to young people. And I am curious, therefore, just as a matter of interest, how old are you?
I'm 22.
You're 22, okay. And what do you consider as young people?
I don't even know if it's an age. I think it's more like a sort of...
Kind of an attitude, maybe?
Yeah, an attitude. It's kind of like an attitude and a lifestyle more than an age. Because I know some people who might not be considered in terms of age young people, but they are very much young people. Like, I've got friends who are like 30 and they're younger people than some of my friends who are 24.
Okay, so what would you classify as young? When you talk about these young people, what is the descriptor that you would give to them? How would you define what that young person is?
So I can give you like maybe a profile of a young person, so it's someone who is very in touch with like pop culture, social media, the type of person who uses Snapchat and Instagram frequently. And is a sheep in terms of as I am with like the youth trends, and rides those youth trends. So whether it's fashion or music or such things, there's like a cult. There's like they follow that culture. So if Drake and Meek Mill are having beef on Twitter, they'll be aware of that. Or if something's gone on in the sort of youth pop culture world, they'll be aware of that and they'll follow that, and it's like a culture, I guess.
Do you think it's something, because you've used that phrase like sheep almost, following the trend and being part of that big crowd that's following on what everybody else is doing, which kind of makes a lot of sense in the context of social chain. But I'm curious as to whether or not you feel that young could still be defined by those people who are more of a kind of a trailblazer, a thought leader, somebody who's willing to kind of get out there on a limb and say, you know what, I'm going to do it my way. It's still a young way, but it's my way. Do you feel that that's still something that can apply?
Yeah, and those are the influences in our culture. Like those are the influences to young people are the ones that are trailblazing, and they kind of set the standard for the rest of our culture to follow. So yeah. Okay.
So now we've made probably the majority of listeners feel really old,
including myself. Thank you.
No, it's good. It's good. Guys, before we wrap up the session, the one thing I would like to ask you is if there is a specific thing, whether that is a cultural shift or a technological shift or an innovation that you think is going to happen in the next maybe 5 years or 10 years, but something is going to significantly impact the landscape of your industry as it stands, what do you think that thing would be? And I'm going to start with you, Mark.
Well, I just want to go back to the sheep comment and why we fundamentally disagree with that for subculture, because we believe that our audience are all sort of influencers. They all have their own personal views and they all have their own ways of dealing with things, expressing their opinions and want to give their sort of personality to everyone else. And hence why it's the subculture as opposed to a culture or pop culture or metal culture or film culture. It's the subculture. And I think that we don't want to do too much of a big plug for subculture. That's what we're hoping to do. We're hoping to be the next big thing for changing the way the music media landscape operates.
Okay. And what about in terms of from a social chain perspective, Steve, what do you think is going to be the next big shift?
So the question is, what would be the sort of next big shift that would impact our industry? Mm-hmm. I think it would be the networks we use realizing that they are losing a great potential revenue stream in letting businesses like ours exist and providing, and them using the influencers on their platform for their own benefit. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is there's this Russian social network, which I can't remember the name of right now, mm-hmm. who have looked at who the influential people are on their own network. And they now sell campaigns directly to those influencers, the social network themselves, and using brands. So that would be like Twitter saying, okay, here are the 1,000 people who are most influential on Twitter. If Coca-Cola and Fox and whoever else and Spotify want to use these influential people on our network, then they have to get in touch with us, and we'll send them their offer and we'll take a cut of it. And that kind of thing would be pretty crazy in just social media in general, and it would really kill off like influencer marketing agencies if the networks where the influencers live started taking that revenue themselves.
Okay. Hopefully none of them are listening right now.
I hope not.
So, guys, thank you so much for your time today. I very much appreciate you joining us on this digital jam session. But in order to allow our listeners to follow you, stalk you, just generally find out what's going on with you, we would like for you to share with us your relevant social media handle of choice. We ourselves prefer Twitter, but whatever is your handle of choice, please do share with us. Mark, what would that be?
We've obviously got the most difficult brand name to pronounce in the world, so I'll try and make this as clear as possible. So ours will be Twitter, and it's at SUBBACULTCHA.com. So that's subculture.com.
Okay, and Steve? I'm not going to try and repeat it. Steve, what's yours?
Ours is twitter.com/thesocialchain.
Okay, so that in front of the social chain. Yeah?
Yeah, the social chain.
Wonderful. Guys, thank you very, very much for your time, and thank you guys for listening. As always, if you enjoy this content and you'd like to hear more, don't forget to subscribe and review. Thanks again for joining us on this Digital Jam session. DigitalJamSessions.com